Coach Wiley, we're back for another week here of talking some ball, and I'm always excited about the guests that you connect us with, and certainly we're excited to talk to Coach Szabo today. So, Coach, welcome back for another week here at Talking Ball.
This is one of the best parts of my week, Keith. The guys that we bring in that have tremendous teaching skills and tremendous experience in the game, and everybody can learn something from what they talk about. And they try to promote the sport and make the younger coaches better coaches, and the older coaches may pick up some of the stuff that they didn't know or just reinforces stuff that they already knew, learn something entirely different and a different way to look at it. And so this is always fun to share information. The gentleman we have on today, the coach we have on today, Steve Szabo, he has a wealth of information and experience.
Coach Szabo, we are excited to have you here today, and I'll get some things going here. So first of all, thank you for taking the time, Coach.
Well, hey, listen, I'm always happy to talk about football. Bob and I have shared a lot through the years. It was amazing that our friendship lasted all this time, because we were here at Colorado State together in 1989. That's a long time ago. But through all these years, we've maintained contact and shared ideas. And it's just that I think we both really care about the game. And so it's always been a topic for us.
Coach, I want to go back to the beginning of your career. You played at the U.S. Naval Academy, played with Roger Staubach, who obviously is a notable from the Naval Academy. And then from there, went on to serve in the military. You went to Vietnam. And then when you came back from Vietnam in 1969, started your football coaching career at Johns Hopkins. So for you, what was it that bridged the gap there that really was the start for you to get into coaching after you were in the military?
I can't explain it because it had to be almost accidental. I never intended to coach. When I left the academy, they asked me to stay back and help coach the plebe team, and I turned it down because I could go to Quantico and play with the Quantico Marines, which I much preferred. So I had no thought about coaching, because when I was playing, I couldn't stand being out of the game and standing on the sideline. I could never figure out why anybody would like to coach. But when I got to Hopkins, I was there on a fellowship. I always had good grades, so I was studying for my PhD in applied math. But I coached football and lacrosse both because I had played lacrosse at the academy too. But I don't know, something happened. I really liked helping kids be better players. I could only think about myself as a kid. When you're young and you're playing, you have all these dreams about playing at higher levels. And the kids at Hopkins, that's Division III. I mean, they weren't very good football players, but they wanted to play, and I found it unbelievably fulfilling and enjoyable to help these kids. And so I made the decision after the completion of 1 year at Hopkins, I sought out a graduate assistantship in college to continue to work on my degree, but also to, let's really see what this coaching is about. I ended up very luckily going to the University of Toledo as a GA, but I was very fortunate. I got there in the summer, and one of the guys on the staff quit in the summer. So the head coach, a guy named Frank Lauterberg, called me in and made me the head freshman coach because freshmen weren't eligible back then. And so here I was as the head freshman coach at Toledo, and I really only had 1 year of experience coaching at Hopkins, and I guarantee you I didn't know anything at that point. So that's how it started. And then it just seemed like once I got into it, one thing led to another, to another, to another, and you just keep going. Next thing you know, you turn around, you've been in it 10 years. And really, all of us in the beginning, you want to be a head coach at some big university. That's what you want to aspire to be. I had some chances, but nonetheless, it was a fabulous journey.
Coach, when you look at how you learned the game, much different than how it's done today. Guys who are getting into the game today have all this information that's very accessible. You don't have to go sit in a dark room somewhere to watch film. Pull it up on your phone and get it from almost anywhere right now.
Yeah.
But there was still, I think, a lot about how we learned the game before all those things. When you look back at that, What aspects of your coaching education are really still applicable and probably helpful to a young coach today?
Speaking to young guys at clinics and, here even in Fort Collins in the immediate area, talking to high school coaches. What I did in the beginning is I contacted people and I asked questions. I mean, that's how I accumulated knowledge. Back when in the beginning, film was not accessible. The only thing we had was 16 millimeter. And I mean, you weren't going to get a hold of any of that unless you had an exchange at the university you worked at. It was unheard of that people would just send you 16 millimeter film to do research on it. You know what I mean? So the film study stuff was not really accessible, but you could contact guys and they would talk football with you, and going to clinics or conventions and meeting other coaches, you had the opportunity to share ideas, like a contrast to today with the internet and cell phones and whatnot. Back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when you'd go to the coaches convention, everybody in the lobby was exchanging notes and writing stuff on paper, you know what I mean? That's all people did. Now, I went to a convention, but it was, that was like 10 years ago. The only thing you see in the lobby are guys on cell phones. Nobody's talking to each other or writing down things or exchanging ideas. I guess that's kind of gone by the wayside, but accumulation of the knowledge about the game came, you end up collecting ideas from people, and then you associate what you believe in to some of those ideas, and you may craft them a little bit to what you have experienced on the field when you apply that stuff. But I have to say that's how I acquired it.
I basically did the same thing. We had to get 16 millimeter film, what Steve was talking about, it was the only thing that you could have back then. I mean, in high schools, when you went to recruit in the high schools, they don't let the film out of the high school.
Right.
The film stays in the high school, and you had to sit there for hours looking at 16 millimeter film because you can't leave the school with it. We'd always try to get together at one school that was going to share where this, I would go to Camp McKinley High School. Thom McDaniels was the head football coach there, Josh's dad, and Josh was only like 9 years old at the time. But I would be there Saban would be in there, Jimmy Bowman would be in there, Bobby Wiegoszewski would be in there. We just sit down on Friday afternoons and watch all the film from the area schools, and then Tom would tell us where the players were. There's a guy here, there's nobody here, and he would save us a lot of footwork. And then you're getting the ideas and taking stuff home to study it more in depth. He didn't get any of that stuff. That was tough to come by.
So this question is for both of you. And looking at that, and certainly I was a part of that too. I mean, I was not the 16 millimeter stuff, but certainly with my dad as a high school coach, I'm very familiar with that. Looking at that situation, as you mentioned it, Coach Wiley, you're sitting in the room with those guys. So I think, you contrast that to the picture that Coach Szabo painted of guys in the lobby at the AFC just looking at their phones. I think what maybe is lost in this is you had the ability to sit down with those guys, share ideas, think things through, and really learn more about some of the thought processes and even the teaching behind that stuff rather than just here's what's happening on film. Do you think, maybe at least right now as we've made this transition, is that something you think maybe is lost a little bit in coaching education?
And Bob and I talk about this often. What's happened now, at least the contact I have had with some of the young coaches in college football and the NFL, I mean, they can recite to you, on the defensive side of the ball, for instance, how to play quarters coverage. But the problem is they don't know where it came from, why it became what it was, and how do you adjust it when you don't have the personnel? They don't have any answers. And I think that's what's been lost, the theory part of how all this stuff came about. I'm sure Bob could speak to the the revolution, if you would call it that, in offensive line technique, and more use of the hands. That stuff, you have to understand where it came from and why it happened in order to deal with players, and I'm going to go to the X and O part now. What I don't see a lot of is the ability of coaches to make adjustments to systems to fit their personnel. Everybody wants to talk about the spread offense in high school. Whoop-de-doo, okay? Well, what do you do if you don't have a quarterback that can run? What do you do if you don't have any kind of receivers with speed? What do you do if you don't have a very good offensive line? I mean, those are the things that you have to understand, because the true art of coaching, you take the cards that you're dealt and you do the best you can with them. That's coaching. We have a saying, all of us do that. You got great players, you're a great coach. You got bad players, you're a bad coach. But the really good ones can take whatever they have dealt to them and make it play the best, get the best performance out of it. And that's coaching. I don't know if we see enough of that today.
I think we see more people teaching schemes than they're actually teaching how to play the offense or how to play the defense. What is the philosophy and the theory behind it, how you play it? And Steve's exactly right. The adjustments, you get young guys that come up and they'll wow you on the blackboard, the chalkboard, or the whiteboards nowadays. And they have all the stuff and they can recite it inside and out like a Bible. But come game day on Sunday afternoons, when it's not like that and they change the back end or they change the front or they're running these new blitzes at you that you hadn't seen before, they really struggle to make the adjustments with that stuff.
Yeah, when I look at, you go back to coaching education, like you said, 30, 40 years ago, longer than that, there was a lot that was it was written in the books. The film wasn't there, right? Today we're video driven in our society in general, right? Even our books are digital now. But when I read some of these books, and just looking across my shelf right now, George Allen, How to Train the Quarterback, Newt Rockne, just simply entitled Coaching, Bear Bryant's book here, Homer Smith. I mean, all these guys, when you read those books, you could strip the scheme out of what they're saying, and holy cow, is there good coaching in detail going on about how to coach the game. And then a lot of those guys would trace, especially like Homer Smith was a historian in like, here's why this was developed and where this came out of, and understanding those things, like you said, the theory behind things and how they develop, I think a lot of times helps you solve some of the problems as you move forward with that. I mean, eventually you're going to take whatever you learn and make it your own in some way, because it has to fit to your personnel. It has to fit you to your situation. But that part of it, when you miss that and you don't have a lot of the detail behind it, I do think it sometimes becomes difficult to evolve yourself as a coach.
Earl Bruce used to tell us, I don't hire anybody that hasn't lined the field. He wanted you to come up through the profession from the ground roots to learn what it's like to be a football coach and put the lines down on the field from Pop Warner or practice or junior high school, where he was your true coach in the sense of how he learned the game. And I think that's what Steve is alluding to, that part there. Steve was very fortunate to work, and I was very fortunate to work with Coach Bruce. Steve longer than me. But he was truly loved the game from the ground up, not just what they see today. I mean, now there's certain things that we do, with the video, which I think is good. There's certain things I think it gives you too much information for it. I mean, like if you wanted to go see a play in 16 millimeter film and it's the 32nd play of the game, well, you got to play through 31 plays to get to that play and then cut it out and so on, however you wanted to do it. Right now, you just click on 32 and it comes up in seconds. So there's good things and there's bad things.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you mentioned Earl Bruce there, Coach, and Coach Szabo, you've been really able to work with some guys who, a Hall of Famer like Lloyd, Carr, Super Bowl champions, Earl Bruce, and let's start with Earl. But looking at all of these guys, I want to bring up a few here, Coach. What's one memorable idea that you learned from each of these guys that really helped you as a coach? And like I said, we'll start with Earl Bruce. What's something you really remember that Earl used to teach or you learned from Earl that really helped you as a coach?
Well, one of the things that Earl was, I thought, just absolutely terrific at was his empathy for the staff. I mean, he constantly wanted to know about, what he could do for the staff. And the other thing about Earl was in discussing game plans, for instance, if you had an idea, I mean, he was going to come at you hard to try and be the devil's advocate. You know what I mean? And if you didn't stick to your guns, he knew you were, that was some pie in the sky deal. I think you have to have conviction about things that you say. Tailoring a game plan is not an easy situation when you're talking about, you might be in a room with 4 or 5 other guys who certainly are not the same as you and have opinions. Well, somehow those opinions got to end up being one thing. Somebody's got to give and somebody's got to take. I thought Earl was really good at making sure that if you wanted to do something, that you had a strong conviction and a reason why you wanted to do that or why it would fit our football team. What was the merit of it? The way he treated the coaches, I never worked for anybody that was as good a person as Earl was. Now, he was cantankerous when he had the head coach hat on, in the football building. I believe that he believed that was the right way to do things. And again, he was a disciple of Woody, so there were certain things about him that were much like Woody.
He made you a better football coach. He made you become a better football coach. He really did. We had to all band together as assistants to be stronger than him and as one guy. That's all. But he made you become a better football coach.
Coach Szabo, the next coach you had the opportunity to work with at a couple different stops was Thom Coughlin. When you look at Coach Coughlin and your time with him, what's something you picked up from him that was important to you?
In some ways, this is going to be a little negative, but I think whenever you're in a football, let's say, program, you're in, whatever it is, you're going to learn things. Some are positives and some are negatives. Thom was detail-oriented. He really wanted everything to be done exactly right. And that's good. But when I go to that now, as far as details goes, there'll be another guy we'll talk about probably in a second, Bill Belichick. Thom was not near as good as Bill when it comes to details. I mean, the things that really matter in a game. But the thing that from Thom was too unyielding. I mean, to the point of irritating the players and making them sometimes somewhat resentful. We had 1,000 rules. And every road trip we ever went on, especially when we were in Jacksonville, I mean, there'd be 6, 8 guys who would get fined, for wearing white socks, for not having a tie on. I mean, they were things that were, they're rules, but they were kind of nitpicky. And it was always that way. And I don't think in dealing NFL-wise with grown men that you can do that because it becomes a source of irritation. You got to have rules. Every organization has to have rules. But you got to make them so that they're applicable. You know what I mean? They're not a source of harassment. If I'd say I learned anything from Thom, it's a negative, is what you don't want to do. And it was Tom's demise in the end. He alienated too many people over small things. When it comes down to issues with players or management, you got to pick your fights. You know what I mean? You got to be wise about, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Find another way to solve that problem.
Right. Well, you mentioned Coach Belichick, and you were able to spend a Super Bowl year with him, and you mentioned his detail. But again, the biggest thing that sticks out to you that was most helpful to you as a coach?
I only was with him 1 year, and I learned more football in 1 year than I had learned in my entire rest of the time I was in the NFL. I mean, when it comes to handling players, designing practice, practicing the right way, game planning. You could take every aspect of an NFL football team, and he mastered it. He knew what to do, and he did the right things. The guy was astounding to me. One of the examples I always give about him, now he's a real student of the game, okay, and a guy who studies film by himself, to come up with the thoughts and the outlines of a game plan. Many times on the sideline in a game, and if you've ever been there, you've ever heard people say, watch this, watch that, in anticipation of some particular play, which probably never happens. But this guy, he came to us one time at the halftime of a game and said before the start of the half, this coming half, he said, you're going to see this, this, and this, so be ready for it. And he was exactly right. He didn't miss a heartbeat. I mean, he just knew the game so well. And as far as adjustments during a game, phenomenal. I mean, he knew how to handle everything. Now, the guy's been in football a long, long time, and he's seen plenty, but he came up the hard way. He was a guy that was just a gopher when he started out, and a geek breaking down film. Because Bill never played in the league. He played very little football in college. He was a long snapper, but he's a true student of the game, and he knows about people and how to handle them. Like, through all these years he's been with the Patriots, you never see an issue at least last a very long time with a player. If a guy's out of line, he gets rid of him, no matter who he is. Randy Moss was an ideal situation. The guy was fine. As soon as he opened his mouth about if he was getting the ball enough, he was gone. Because Bill does not tolerate from any player, to have any kind of issue in the locker room where you're a distraction and a source of a problem. He really believes wholeheartedly in that, for a team to function, you can't have that. So, I mean, I could go on. I could probably talk for hours about different things that I learned being around him. And I probably don't know near as much as some of those guys that were with him for a long time, like Dante Scarnecchi, a whole bunch of guys, Romeo Crennel. I mean, they probably learned a lot more than I, but I picked up everything I possibly could, when I was there for that time.
Coach, in 2006 and 7, part of the Michigan Wolverines as the linebacker coach there. I was at the 2006 Michigan-Ohio State game, which I got to say is one of the best live football games I've ever been at. An incredible game. Ohio State was number 1. You guys were number 2. And that thing was back and forth. And wow, like I said, what a game. And I thought it was so well coached by both sides. But Lloyd Carr was the head coach in the College Football Hall of Fame now. When you think of Lloyd Carr, what were the things that impacted you in serving on his staff?
Well, Lloyd was good with communication. I really had a lot of open communication with him, but I had known Lloyd from my time at Ohio State back in 79, 80, 81 when he was at Michigan. And so we had been, I don't want to say great friends, but we'd communicated with each other. This was the exchange of ideas thing. So I had known Lloyd for quite a long time. But Lloyd was, as a head coach, he gave you the latitude to do what you needed to do. He had complete confidence in guys, and he let them coach, which, some guys have a hard time with that, letting go of, you see it in the NFL more than anything with head coaches calling offensive plays. They can't let go, and really they're not helping themselves. Because the best head coaches are CEOs, guys who, know both sides of the ball and special teams, and they let those coordinators coach. Lloyd was really good in that game you alluded to. I think we're going to get a replay this year.
Yeah.
Because it looks like both of them are going to end up 11-0, be playing in Columbus again. That particular game was a heartbreaker because, boy, in the end of it, we had them on third down, and their quarterback scrambled, and Crable hit the guy and knocked him out of bounds, and they called him for roughing. It was an awful call, because we'd have gotten the ball back. They had not really stopped us. Well, we hadn't stopped them either. For a team that led the nation in rush defense, which we did in '06, we played not as good a game as we wish we had. But they had good players. What they did throw the ball well that day.
It was certainly a good game, and I agree. We're probably going to see that here in another month or so again. I'm going to bring Coach Wiley back into this. We wanted to dig in a little bit with you, Coach, and really get a perspective from a defensive coach. I mean, you've coached all three levels of the defense, defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs, but really thinking about that front unit of the linebackers in line and some of the things you were looking for. So thinking about the breakdown of an opposing offensive line, right? When you're looking at that line, what do you look for to find a matchup you like or a weakness in their unit? What are some of those things, those indicators to you that say here's an area we need to attack or maybe even stay away from?
Well, what I've always looked at when I've evaluated an offensive line is I'm trying to look at each guy and see what he can and cannot do. Okay, not most, but often a guy may have size but doesn't have very good feet. He doesn't have the ability to recover or redirect. By redirect, I mean when they come off the ball that they can get their feet in the ground and match the movement of a defensive lineman. In pass pro, do they get top heavy? Are they soft? I think when you really just look at them one at a time and try to evaluate, again, what I say in my mind, what they can and cannot do. Because almost all of them have some things that they labor with that they're not very good at, for lack of better words. And so it's when you find those things and you put it all together, like in the pass pro thing, when you evaluate the whole group, the offensive line, some of those guys aren't as good as other guys in pass pro, and so the things you're going to look at is what kind of games you can run to take advantage of that. I mean, if a guy is really poor, and I mean, especially soft, you may change, the alignment of some of your players to take advantage of that. And you see that often now in the league. They'll take an edge guy and put him inside because he's got a better matchup in there. Or they'll take an inside guy like Donald from the Rams and play him outside on the edge.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Steve, but I can attest to what he's saying is we were playing the Green Bay Packers one year, and I had a left guard who was a rookie, and they put Reggie White on him. So that's what Steve's talking about right there.
Right. But, to evaluate a line, it takes time. I mean, you got to look at, at least 2-3 games and watch them play. Watch each guy on every play and see how he reacts with his body. I mean, the really, really good ones have agility, balance, really good feet, and they have the adequate mass. You know what I mean? They're 300-pound guys. In today's game, it's hard to play with a smaller guy because the defensive linemen are so big. I mean, the whole game is big people now is all over 300 pounds. And so a guy who 25 years ago at 275 pounds was considered adequate no longer is. You got to look at those guys one at a time, and it takes time. It isn't something you do in an hour. It takes time. And if you're careful about it and you've done it thoroughly, then you can say with conviction what you believe is the strength and weakness of each of those guys, which will kind of tell you how you want to play them. Now, the run game is different. The run game to me is what kind of schemes they run and how are they tied to the formations. Because then you can anticipate some of the things and possibly even by alignment help yourself against their run scheme. So that's a little different. I mean, you don't quite get as much or try to get as much advantage in the run game by personnel as you do by scheme. Now, on the other side of the ball, I think offensively, say, for instance, a defensive end is not a real physical guy that can't set the edge. An offense, I can see taking advantage of going at the guy, possibly with gap schemes where they kick him out. I don't know how Bob feels about that, but I think the run scheme thing is a little different than pass.
Yeah, we need in the run scheme stuff. When you look at how does the defensive line get 3-by-1 sets? How do they line by 2-by-2 sets? How do they align when we put up 2 tight ends? We create the extra gap. How are they going to play the extra gap? Okay,
Right.
So we're trying to look for those little. Nowadays, if the team's running the outside zone play and they got the right guys trying to get on the 3 technique. Well, if you've got a tight 3 technique, a lot of those guys in today's pro football are pretty good players, and they can get on that guy's outside shoulder. And in that, we call it a buckboard technique, where you're going to take, they use a buckboard technique coming off the ball, great penetration. You're going to combat that. The wider they put that guy, the tougher it is. So they do stuff. Hey, this team's running the stretch play. We're not going to put the 3 technique on the guard. We're going to get them a little bit wider to make it as tough as they can on that guard to get out there and get that guy. I think that's what Steve's alluding to. And now, as an offensive guy, you're going to say, wow, how wide is that guy? We should be running the inside play instead of the outside play. Or if we're going to run the outside play, maybe we need to bring the tackle down and pull the guy and pin that guy, where he is. So, you play all those games. So those are all the little adjustments that I think Steve's alluding to in the run game. And hey, it is a scheme, and we're going to take advantage of the scheme by making it as tough as we can on those guys. And then as an offensive coach, you're going to say, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, we're pushing a tank up a hill trying to get the right guard to block the 3 technique. That's almost a 4-eye, okay, on the tackle. That's crazy. You stop playing those chess games in the middle of the game that you're playing.
Yeah, I think when you look at, you mentioned it, some of the formations, and obviously you could get some tips off of the formations, but looking at some of the things you had to face, Coach, what were the most difficult formations to work against?
Well, Bob mentioned, I think one thing always comes to, because we kind of evolved, and this now goes down way back into the 60s and 70s and how it came about. But, a long time ago, we were all 34 defenses where we 2-gapped. But what we found out is very difficult in college at that time to recruit guys that could 2-gap. And so we evolved to under defense. And what we did for the defensive linemen, instead of 2-gapping them, we made them all 1-gap players, which was easier to find guys to play that way. But you ended up playing a lot more under and even a little bit over, but under was the big deal. So once we were in under, again, we 1-gap those down guys, and we said, okay, the 2-gap players now are going to be the linebackers who can do that because they're off the line of scrimmage and they got an opportunity to read, that the play's better. Now, your question to me was what
formations?
What was difficult? Well, because under required us to reduce one side of the front. When you came out in an 8-gap front that Bob talked about, how are you going to play the back side of it? Because you got a 3 technique, and the next guy, where do you want to play him? You want to play him in a 6-eye on the tight end and risk, them being able to run outside zone and get the ball outside of the edge of the defense? You're going to play him in a 9 technique, and now you got really a free gap, a C gap that a linebacker is going to have to play. You had to think that was problematic for under defense, okay? And then the employment of a wing next to a tight end, which made the front longer. You can't do the old unbalanced line in the NFL, but you can create a stretch to one side with a tight end wing because you're creating another gap. I'd say the 8-gap front, the wing would be 2 of the things that would be bothersome in the run game. And then again, if you want to go to schemes too, you get into a little bit in the personnel. People have been doing this for a long time, but obviously when you get the wildcat stuff with somebody playing quarterback other than a quarterback and the kind of formation they're in when they're in wildcat, you want to come up with stuff that you're going to make the guy be a passer. You're not going to let him run the ball. As soon as you see wildcat, you should be thinking, 8-man fronts, different things that will really be strong against the run and force the guy to be a passer.
What about the bunch set, Steve? Is that a problem? Run and pass?
Yeah, we'll see the bunch again if it's tight to the formation, okay? Because people bunch extended from the formation, but the bunch tight to the formation is kind of like the wing because you're dealing with more gaps. You've created more gaps by having that tight bunch on the split end side. Those are the things that are bothersome. I mean, how are you going to deal with them? Are you going to move your defensive front over full man, or are you going to have to make some kind of adjustment in your secondary or linebackers, to shift them over where they're in position? Because all run defense is based on gap responsibility, and you got to have somebody responsible. And as I said, we've really, in modern defensive football, gotten away from two-gapping very much with down guys. I mean, there may be some people that are still doing it, but it's just not a real good, efficient way to play defense because you can't guarantee you're going to get 100% execution. It's hard.
Going back to that bunch set, Steve, in your experience, you got the Szabo, you're on the left half, and you got the bunch to the right, okay? And is it harder for you guys if on the backside, if that receiver is an X and he's out there, you know what I mean? He's out by the numbers someplace, or is it harder if we put a tight end and attach him to the backside of the formation and just keep the bunch to one side and the tight end to the other side?
When people get into really tight formations, what you're saying, you got a bunch on one side and a regular tight end on the other side. To me, that's an advantage to the defense because now you're playing in a box. We don't have to defend as much grass. When you got a split end on the backside, that's better because you open up the field more. Now, I don't know if you understand what I mean, but
yeah, more space. The more space we give the defense, the less they like it.
Right. That's why the spread offense, and the spread is definitely grown into the NFL. The spread became such a great thing because it spread the defense out. It made you defend more grass. You got to think way back when, you start with the single wing. There was no width to it, okay? It was successful, but people caught up with it because you don't have to defend as much field, and then people went to the split back veer, and then there was the wishbone. But even in those offenses, they didn't spread people out, especially in the bone. I mean, so you had opportunities to scheme some things up on defense because you had less field to defend. I think that's an important aspect of defensive football. Understanding when an offense comes out in a formation, what exactly do you have to take away?
I know that, sometimes go to a 3-by-1 set and have nickel people in the game, and the defense is playing us an under defense, and you got no place to run the football. Now, in pro football years ago, I'm not talking about what they do now. I'm talking about years ago. So if you go 3-by-1 and the defense just plays under, well, there's no place to run the football years ago. Okay, what are you going to do? The best day reducing it is to run the outside zone play. Right? They got 7 guys up there. You only got 6 blockers. So what are you going to run? Somebody's going to be free. So you let the backside defensive end free, and you try to run the outside zone play. Well, now they got the RPOs, they got option plays, they got everything else. So now defense, well, we're going to get out of this. We got to put more people out.
Now in pro football is, everybody used to talk about on early downs playing 8-man fronts because you were getting heavy run, but they're throwing the ball so much more now, and plus the fact of the RPO. I mean, you start, especially in cover 4, you start taking defensive backs and telling them they have a primary gap responsibility, man. They are in a real quandary when you start with a run fake, because if they go to their run responsibility, the RPO is wide open. I think offensive football, with the advent of the spread, with all of its trimmings, the RPOs and the zone reads and all that, has put a lot of stress on defense. And I think offense is ahead of defense right now. Defense has not come up with what do I want to call it, a solution, for all of it. It's just a lot. I think one of the things that the defensive guys are doing a little bit more now is running pressure defenses on early downs, because what it does is it helps them in the run game and potentially at least cuts down the time factor, for the quarterback on, let's say, an RPO to have a chance to read a bunch of stuff. And I do believe this with defensive football, especially at the NFL level where the quarterbacks can really throw the football. Your way to beat the pass game isn't in coverage. It's in getting the quarterback. Like, you're going to play a team that throws the ball 50 times a game. I think it behooves you on defense to study their protection schemes and figure out how you can get to the guy. That's going to help you a hell of a lot more than trying to play whatever coverage it is, because these receivers are so good and the quarterbacks can throw the ball so well. If you don't get around the guy and disrupt the timing, you're in trouble.
Now, Steve, when you do that, is somebody breaking down the amount of time the quarterback is released? 2.3 seconds, 2.2 seconds.
It depends on the routes they're running. You know what I mean? You got to look at the route combinations that they run. The kind of stuff that, let's say, routes that are associated with the three-step game, like slants, and hitches and things that look like that. I mean, when you get a lot of that stuff now it's difficult to get to the guy, even with pressure. But then what you got to do is, I think with those kind of guys, you got to roll the dice a little bit in the three-man rush them, which I don't like doing because I've always hated that. Because three-man rush, it's hard to get around the guy. And these guys are so good that if you give them time, you can't play coverage well enough, long enough, to stop them from getting a completion.
Well, we get extra blockers when you three-man rush. I mean, if somebody, you can theoretically get 2.5 double teams. You can double team the end, the nose guard, and the back and chip on the other side. You get 3 double teams. Now, if you got really good defensive players that can beat the double teams, you get a chance.
Yeah, but it's, again, you got to deal with what you got. You know what I mean? What you're playing with. Hell, if you got a bunch of super studs, I mean, you can do a lot of stuff. But most of us know in coaching that you have to assume most of the time you just got regular guys, and you somehow got to get it done with them.
We talked a little bit here about the advent of the spread and the RPOs and everything that goes along with that. And a game I recall from this past weekend, being here in Cleveland, watching the Browns as I always do, the Patriots run a stretch play to the right with a jet sweep coming back to the left, and they're blocking out on the perimeter. And you see the flow of the defense. I mean, those guys are reading their keys. They're run fitting, just like you said with the RPO that it makes it so difficult. And now you're just left with 3-on-3 football on the outside with really nobody free to get the back. When you're facing those kinds of teams who want a false key, I mean, is it like the RPO where the best way to defend something like that is to pressure it, to blitz it, and to take reads out of it? I mean, they want you to read the keys, obviously, and take you the wrong way because your players are disciplined. So what's an approach there?
We call those plays wrong way runs. That's what, as on the offensive side of the ball. So we want to run a wrong way run. So it looks like 18, or stretch, but that's just to get the defense over there. So that's the term that we use in the meeting room. Not that it means anything to anybody,
but your statement's exactly right. The way, it's just like the spread guys in college running the read zone. I mean, they're great at it if you're going to sit there and play vanilla defense and they have the opportunity to, just like they're running the play on barrels, all right? So defensively, what you got to do is you got to pressure them. You got to give them things that they don't have the time to execute what they're supposed to do. And that play that you're talking about, I mean, if you know that they have it, again, the hard thing is figuring out when, but that's film study. Knowing exactly what they run out of every formation by personnel grouping and when. So that if you have a pretty good idea when it's going to happen, I mean, you like to run double edge pressure. You come from both sides off the edge. Okay, now I don't care what kind of false key they're giving, it isn't going to matter. You're going to be in a pretty good defense. I just, would only say when you play too much just straight vanilla defense, you're really asking for it. Because most of these guys on offense, they have a lot of answers and ways to handle all kinds of fronts as long as they're stationary and there's nobody pressuring. There's nothing special about who's doing what. And, again, I think it behooves you on defense. You got to do something more than just be standing there. It's too easy for them. You got to make it hard.
I know one thing, Steve, that in the run game, if you guys are running blitz stunts, the twist, 2-man games, 3-man games, and you're running it in the run game on early downs, those are tough to handle. You get a lot more zero plays or even negative plays, when you guys when you're playing vanilla defense on first down. And in the philosophy, say the philosophy of the offense is, okay, we want to live in a world of 3rd and 4 to 6. If we can get in 3rd and 4 to 6, that's where we want to think that we can complete most of the third down plays. The higher percentage that we can complete and get first down. So if we run the ball on first down and we only get 2 yards, they say, Scott, you're not running the ball well. You only got 2 yards. Well, if we run it on second down and get 2 yards, now we're in the world of 3rd and 4 to 6. If we get back to the line of scrimmage on first down and we don't get any yards, we get 0 yards, but it's not a negative play. And then second down, we get 4 yards. We're back in the world of 3rd and 4 to 6. So somehow when the defense gets us on early downs, is what makes it a lot tougher on the offense. I know that, but I don't see a lot of TEs and ETs and TTs in 3-man games in first down football.
But you can run, different run stunts. You can involve backers. I'm saying if you're like in a 34 front, bring one of the 4 backers as the 4th rusher, but you stunt the front. When you do it, you create something. You create movement. That's problematic. And you end up being not so bad because you're still dropping 7 and you're playing a base coverage, but you got something going on up front. I think that's the thing you want to constantly do. You don't want to be super predictable in the early downs where you got to make a decision defensively, run, pass. See, third down for a defense is a lot easier because it's more one-dimensional. The hardest part of defensive football is determining whether it's a run or pass because every player's responsibility changes between run and pass. So in those split seconds when the ball is snapped, making that decision, that is really important and very difficult. That's why the play action passes work so well on early downs.
You're talking about the run action passes.
It's just really hard. Like, you got to go by individual position on defense. Defensive linemen coming off the ball and playing the run, and then it turned into a play action pass, and they have to convert to a pass rush off of what begins as a run fit. That's hard. It's hard for the linebackers who, when they read run in the beginning of the play and start to move to their gap responsibilities, and then it becomes pass, and they got to get out of that and get into their coverage responsibility. That's the hard stuff.
We tell the offensive line, make it look and sound like a run, because run plays sound a whole lot different than pass plays.
Right.
There's no noise. There's no noise in pass plays. If you listen, from behind the defense, if you shut your eyes and just listen, and they're throwing a 5-step drop, there's no noise. You know what I mean? There's a lot of grunting, but there's no noise. But if we're running an inside zone play on first down or a lead play on first down, there's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, it not only has to look like the run, it has to sound like the run to the defensive guys. Do you think that's a true statement?
It could be, but one of the things I have to say that I never espouse, nor did I ever tell the players to be listening to the offensive talk, only because you're not focused on what you need to do.
Well, I'm not talking about the line calls. I'm talking about
line calls.
The collision is a lot different in the run game. There's a collision, there's noise in the run game. There's a lot of noise from the collisions that are happening. In past plays, there's not. You know, we use our hands. We get our hands on you. It's really kind of silent.
That's been the nature of the beast, the nature of the plays, you know, as far as line play goes. You know what I mean? You aren't going to hear a lot on a pass, you know, because your guys, the offensive linemen, are trying to get a good pass set based on their responsibilities. And the defensive guys they're flying off the ball, trying to get into whatever pass rush technique they want to try to use, or they've already pre-thought about what they're going to use.
Yeah, they want to make us go someplace that we don't want to go.
Well, Coach, you've certainly been gracious with your time here, and it was great to dig into some of these things. And to wrap it up, you've had a tremendous career, over 40 years in the game. And looking back on your career, what's the best advice you can give a young coach wanting to reach his full potential in this profession?
First off, be a student of the game. Learn as much as you can and ask as many questions as you can. Because if you don't ask, you can assume a lot of things that really aren't true. And secondly, coach as many positions as you can to understand the game. You know, like I felt very fortunate that I could coach D-line, linebackers, and the secondary because I could understand the issues. And matter of fact, I even had a time, I had 6 years in my career where I coached quarterbacks and receivers, which I thought was great. And I was an offensive coordinator when I did that. So, I mean, offensive game planning and what they have to deal with really helps you as a defensive coach because you get a little bit of understanding of what they're going through and what their thought process is. And I think it helps you as a coach to coach multiple positions so you really get the feel of how everything fits together. At least I'm talking about defensively. It's so helpful. And I think that young coaches, when given the opportunity to coach anything, even special teams, to, you know, have some partial responsibility is good for you. I mean, there's a lot to understand about the game. And until you get involved with coaching a position, I don't think you truly understand what's involved. Then you start to understand the problems.
What was helpful to me, Steve, when I was at the Bengals, Dick LeBeau was the defensive coordinator. Okay, so in the off season, okay, when I had time and the defense was meeting, I would go sit in their meetings. You know, I'd ask Dick, "Is it okay if I sit in here?" And he'd go, "Yeah, not a problem, Bob." You know what I mean? And just listen to him talk and listen to them discuss defense against offense. And that was very helpful to me also.
I think that's really true. But again, that to me goes along with continuing education part of it, of you seeking out information as much as you can. It isn't going to come to you. You know what I mean? You're going to have to go seek it. For young coaches, I'm thinking about a guy in high school where there isn't the time nor the structure like there is in college or the NFL. Just try to get involved in as many different things as you can because you get to learn the basics. And that really helps in your overall understanding of the game. It's a fabulous game. But to the regular fan, they don't understand. It's much more complex than meets the eye. And that goes with fundamental techniques as well as the X and O's.
Coach Szabo, this has been a great hour with you, learning some ball from you, hearing your perspective that you've learned over this game and everything you've done. So we certainly appreciate the time that you spent with us here today.
It's, like I said, always fun to talk about ball and to recall, you know, some of the things that you witnessed.
Steve, it's always a pleasure for me to talk to you, period. Number one. And not only about football, but we talk about life in general, too. It's just not football all the time, okay? Yeah. And over the years, I've learned so much from our conversations that we have just by itself that I really like to thank you for all the help that you've given me through the course of my career. Yeah. And the people out there, and Steve's a wonderful football coach. He's really good at what he does. He's really helpful. He's willing to share information. You know, with all that said, he's actually a better person than he is a football coach.
But, you know, our friendship goes way beyond football. You know, and again, I know that this program is basically for football, so we don't need to get into a great discussion about the things you and I have shared through the years that are personal. But
yeah, like the golf.
Believe me, in football, coaches, we have a lot of, might I call them, associates or people, that we know. But we don't have that many true friends. Bob's a true friend. It isn't just football. It's life, and again, good friends are hard to come by. They really are. I mean, people you can count on and that they're always in your corner in all the aspects of life. So anyway, it's been really enjoyable for me. Kick to talk about football, but good to, visit with Bob in this program.
Thank you for listening to the Mushroom Society series on the Coaching Coordinator podcast. Be sure to check out the Cool Clinic and all the great talks from this past year and the year before. And we're adding some great new content. For example, this week we added Howard Mudd and Paul Boudreau, some historical content from past Cool Clinic. Check that out at coachtube.com/Cool Clinic. Follow the Cool Clinic on Twitter at The Cool Clinic, and follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.